It was a perfectly normal Tuesday afternoon. My wife, Martha, was baking cookies, and our two grandchildren, Leo and Lily, were tearing through the house, turning everything into a game. Leo, who was 10, and Lily, 8, were staying with us for the week. Their laughter usually filled the house with joy, but that day, their giggling felt like the prelude to disaster. Their current game was buried treasure, which meant they were hunting for things Martha and I had forgotten about. "Grandpa George, come here. We found the best hiding spot ever," Lily shouted, dragging me by the hand toward the dusty old coat closet by the stairs. I chuckled, thinking they found an old tennis racket or perhaps a forgotten Christmas ornament. I followed them into the small, dark closet. They pointed excitedly to the very top shelf, where we store the winter coats. There, tucked deep behind a moth-eaten woolen blanket, was a box. It wasn't just any box. It was a heavy, old metal box, dark green and secured with a tiny, silver latch. I hadn't seen that box in at least 30 years. "What's inside?" Leo asked, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "Is it gold?" The box was surprisingly heavy when I pulled it down. It smelled faintly of old paper and cedar. It was a box I used to keep important papers in when Martha and I were first married, but I thought I'd thrown it out decades ago. It had been replaced by modern filing cabinets and cloud storage, making this relic completely irrelevant. The children huddled around me as I set the box on the floor. I tried the latch, but it was surprisingly stiff, and a small, antique keyhole was visible just above it. "It's locked," I announced, try to sound dramatic for the kids. Lily immediately looked sad. "A locked treasure chest? How will we ever open it?" I told them that sometimes the simplest answers are the best. The key must be somewhere nearby. This fueled their game again. They spent the next hour crawling through the floorboards and sifting through Martha's sewing basket. I almost forgot about the box. Thinking they would give up, I went back to reading the newspaper, listening to their muffled searches. Martha called out from the kitchen, "Are they finding anything valuable back there?" "Just dust," I called back, smiling at the sound of her voice. I felt safe and happy in my ordinary life. About 20 minutes later, Lily came running back, her face smeared with soot, clutching something small and shiny in her hand. "Look, Grandpa George." It was under the loose tile in the fireplace. "It's the key." She handed me the key. It was tiny, made of tarnished brass, and looked exactly like the one that used to belong to that old box. I felt a weird little thrill. The excitement of solving a mystery, fueled by my grandchildren's innocent game. I took the key, walked back to the box, and slid it into the lock. It clicked open easily, the sound startlingly loud in the quiet hallway. Leo and Lily gasped, crowding around me as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, there was no gold, no jewels, and no maps. There was only paper, neatly stacked and tied with a faded red ribbon. On top of the stack was an old, brittle envelope addressed to me, in handwriting I knew instantly. It was my brother Frank's handwriting. Frank had died suddenly 40 years ago, just 2 weeks after my son David was born. My stomach suddenly felt cold, and the playful mood vanished. This was not a harmless game anymore. I quickly shut the lid, standing up abruptly. "Okay, treasure found," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. "Time for cookies and milk. This box is just old bills, nothing exciting for you two. Go on." The children complained, wanting to see the old bills, but Martha's freshly baked cookies were a much stronger lure. They rushed to the kitchen, leaving me alone with the metal box. I felt a deep dread settling over me. Why was this box, which I thought was gone, suddenly reappearing? And why would Martha have hidden it in the coat closet, covered with blankets, never telling me she still had it? I picked up the box and carried it carefully into my study, locking the door behind me. The room was quiet, lit only by the afternoon sun streaming through the window. I set the box on my desk, cut the ribbon, and lifted the brittle envelope with Frank's handwriting. Frank and I had been close, but this letter had never reached me. The postmark was 40 years old. I settled into my chair and unfolded the paper, my hands shaking slightly. I took a deep breath, preparing to read the words of my dead brother, written just before he died. The letter began normally, with Frank congratulating me and Martha on the birth of our healthy son, David. It was filled with Frank's usual humor and warmth. But then the tone shifted. Frank wrote about a deep mistake he had made in his past and how he was trying to fix it. He apologized for something he called a terrible secret. I read the next line 3 times before the words truly sank in, burning themselves onto my mind. Frank wrote that he made a life-changing mistake with Martha before we got married, and that the beautiful new baby, David, was actually his son, not mine. The world tilted. The simple air in the room suddenly felt thick and impossible to breathe. 40 years. 40 years I had believed I was David's father. 40 years I had loved him, taught him to ride a bike, paid for his college, and watched him become the wonderful man he was today. And all that time, Martha had known. The letter ended with Frank saying he intended to tell me the truth immediately, no matter how much it hurt. He wanted me to know the truth before he left for his business trip. But he died on that trip, in an accident that claimed his life. The letter must have been mailed afterward, but somehow intercepted. I dropped the letter onto the desk, the thin paper floating down silently. My hands covered my face. My mind was screaming, but no sound came out. The truth was an impossible weight crushing me. David, my son, my only child, was the son of my deceased brother, Frank. I looked at the framed photo of David and his family on my desk. David was smiling, his arms around his wife and children. I felt a wave of nausea. I had always joked that David looked a little like Frank, but I had brushed it off as a family resemblance. Now, every shared feature, every similarity in their mannerisms, took on a horrifying new clarity. Frank's dark hair, Frank's distinctive jawline. It was all staring back at me from the photo of my son. I picked up the stack of papers tied with the red ribbon. They were letters between Martha and Frank, all dating from 40 years ago, leading up to David's birth. I didn't need to read them to confirm the truth, but I did anyway. The letters were filled with desperate attempts to hide the secret, talk of guilt, and fear of telling me. I stood up, pushing away from the desk. I had to confront Martha. I had to know why she had kept this darkness hidden for 4 decades. I unlocked the study door and walked toward the kitchen. The warm smell of Martha's cookies hit me, usually a comfort, but now it felt suffocating, like a lie baked into the very air. Martha was at the counter, dusting powdered sugar over the cookies. Leo and Lily were sitting at the table, their faces dusted with white. Everything looked perfectly happy and normal. The contrast was unbearable. Martha looked up and smiled at me. "Find any treasure, old man?" "The kids said you acted very mysterious." I walked over to her and stopped right in front of her. I tried to speak, but my throat was tight. I reached into my pocket and pulled out Frank's letter, crumpled and shaking in my hand. I placed it on the counter between us. "The kids found your box, Martha," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I saw her eyes widen, and the color instantly drained from her face. She looked at the letter, then at me. Her hands, which had been dusting sugar, froze mid-air. "George," she started, her voice sounding dry and brittle. 40 years, Martha," I continued, fighting to keep my voice low so the children wouldn't hear. 40 years you let me believe David was mine. Why?" Martha didn't deny it. She didn't even try to lie. The immediate, total shock on her face was all the confirmation I needed. She grabbed my arm, her grip desperate and tight, and pulled me toward the living room away from the children. "Come with me. Now." "Not here," she pleaded, her eyes darting toward the kitchen table. We reached the living room, and she spun around to face me. The smile was gone, replaced by an expression of pure, terrified grief. "I was going to tell you one day, George. I swear I was. When I was on my deathbed, when David had his own grandchildren, I felt the anger rising, a heat that threatened to consume me. Frank wrote this letter. He wanted me to know before he died. Why did you hide it? Why did you keep the box locked away all this time?" She looked away, unable to hold my gaze. "Frank and I, it was just one terrible mistake, George. Right before our wedding. I regretted it instantly. When he died, when David was just a baby. I couldn't bear to shatter your heart. You were so happy. David needed a father. But David had a father. I roared, forgetting to keep my voice down. Me. I was his father. And you knew every time I told him I loved him. Every time I bragged about my son, it was all a lie. Martha flinched, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't a lie of love, George. It was a lie of protection. Frank was gone. If I had told you, it would have destroyed you. You would have left me, and David would have grown up without a father and without a name. I chose to save our family, even if it meant carrying this terrible secret alone. She was weeping now, deep, shaking sob that echoed in the quiet room. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to reach out, but my body felt frozen, betrayed. 40 years of shared life, love, and partnership felt like smoke, dissolving in front of my eyes. The foundation of our entire world was built on a lie she had carefully hidden in a metal box. I looked at her, my wife, the woman I trusted above all others. You didn't save the family, Martha. I said, my voice heavy with pain. You just built it on quicksand. And my innocent grandchildren just found the switch. I spent the next hour in complete silence, sitting in the corner armchair while Martha cried, eventually moving to the sofa. I didn't say anything, and she didn't try to speak either. I needed to understand the dimensions of this loss. David was 40 years old. He was a successful engineer, happily married, a good man. Everything he'd achieved had happened under the umbrella of my love and support, believing he was my son. And now, I had to decide what to do with the truth. If I kept it to myself, the lie continued. But I would carry the weight of knowing my wife had fooled me for 4 decades. If I told David, I risked destroying his world, his relationship with Martha, and possibly even his relationship with me. Was it my right to take away the security he had lived under for 40 years? I looked down at my hands. They were the hands that had rocked David to sleep, taught him to fish, and shook his hand at his wedding. Those hands were innocent, but they were attached to a man whose entire history was suddenly false. I went back to the study and reread the letters, looking for any sign of a more complex plot, a scheme, an ongoing deception. But the letters confirmed what Martha had said. It was a brief mistake, a moment of weakness, followed by Frank's death, which cemented the lie in place. Frank's intentions were clear. He wanted the truth out. Martha's intentions were to protect the life we had built. Both intentions had led to the same massive, hidden disaster. I felt a strange, detached kind of grief for Frank. He never got to know his son. He never got to tell me the truth, which would have been painful but honest. His silence allowed Martha's deception to thrive. As I looked at the old documents, I found another envelope tucked beneath the stack. It was an old life insurance policy for Frank. The beneficiary was listed as David, son of Frank and Martha. This was not a policy I knew about. Martha must have known this existed. This document proved Frank wanted to provide for David without telling me, but the policy had never been claimed. The insurance policy added another layer to the betrayal. Martha hadn't just hidden the parentage. She had hidden a potential financial gift that could have been David's. Why? Maybe to further bury the truth. I folded the documents neatly and put them back in the metal box. I felt like a detective, piecing together a 40-year-old crime scene. Later that evening, after the grandchildren were asleep, Martha came into the study. She sat down across from me, her face swollen from crying, but her eyes steady now. I know this is unforgivable, George, she said, her voice hoarse. But I need you to understand. When Frank died, the doctor said David had inherited his rare blood type. The truth was too big to ignore. But you loved David so fiercely. You look so proud. I couldn't break you. But David needs to know the truth about his medical history, Martha. About his lineage. I argued, that's not just a secret. That's irresponsible. I know, she whispered. I've carried the guilt of that responsibility every single day. I looked at the woman I had loved for almost 50 years. She was a deceiver, but she was also a woman who had tried to build a happy life from a disastrous mistake. The next morning, I went for a walk alone. I needed space to think before the grandchildren woke up, and life demanded that I pretend everything was normal. I walked down the street, looking at the houses, trying to ground myself in reality. I kept seeing David's face. I kept seeing Frank's face. David looked exactly like Frank, a truth I had ignored for decades. He had Frank's height, Frank's sense of humor, even Frank's slightly crooked pinky finger. How had I been so blind? Because I loved him. When David was born, he was my entire world. Love had created a blind spot the size of a mountain. The thought of telling David was a physical pain in my chest. He loved Martha and me completely. He thought he knew exactly who he was. This truth would be like ripping the ground out from under him. But keeping it hidden felt like complicity, like I was now a partner in Martha's enormous lie. I walked back home, knowing there was only one path forward. I had to tell him. It was unfair to him, unfair to Frank's memory, and completely unfair to the 40 years I had spent loving a man I thought was my biological son. I decided to start by talking to David's mother, Martha. I found her in the kitchen, silently making coffee. We avoided each other's eyes. The air between us was thick with unspoken anguish. "We have to tell him, Martha," I said, putting my hand on the counter for support. "I can't live with this secret anymore. It belongs to him, not to us. He deserves to know who his biological father was." Martha slowly turned around, her eyes wide with fear. "It will ruin him, George. It will destroy everything he knows about his life. And he will hate me." "He might hate the lie, Martha," I said, "but David is strong. We raised him right. He can handle the truth. What he can't handle is finding out years from now that everyone he trusted kept this from him." She started crying again, quietly, hopelessly. It was easier when Frank's letter was buried. Now the children had brought it back to life. I knew she was right. The children's innocent prank had acted as a final, inescapable judgment on her decision. I called David that afternoon and asked him to come over without Martha's knowledge. I said I had something important to discuss, something urgent. David, sensing the seriousness of my tone, agreed to come by immediately after work, once the grandkids were already home with his wife. I spent the next 3 hours sitting alone in the study, reviewing the letters again, trying to formulate the words. How do you tell your 40-year-old son that his dead uncle is his biological father? There are no easy answers. I needed to focus on the love, on the fact that nothing had changed about the relationship we shared. Martha stayed in the bedroom. She couldn't face him. She couldn't watch the destruction of the man she loved with a mother's fierce devotion. When David finally arrived, he walked into the study, looking concerned. He was carrying a 6-pack of beer and a bag of takeout food. "Dad, what's going on?" "You sounded worried. Did something happen to the house?" I looked at my son, standing there, so familiar and yet suddenly so strange. He was tall, just like Frank. He had Frank's quiet confidence. He looked nothing like me, the short, bald man sitting behind the desk. "David, sit down," I said, pointing to the chair across from me. My voice was surprisingly steady. I knew I couldn't delay this any longer. He sat, his concern deepening as he looked at my serious face. "Dad, you're scaring me. Did the doctor call?" I shook my head. "It's not about health, son. It's about history. It's about something that happened before you were born." I picked up the metal box in the corner of the desk, opened it, and gently pulled out Frank's letter. I handed it to David. "I found this yesterday, David," I said. "Leo and Lily found the box it was hidden in. I need you to read this. All of it." David took the letter, frowning in confusion as he saw Frank's handwriting. "Uncle Frank? Why would Uncle Frank write you a letter 40 years ago that you never read?" David began to read. I sat back, watching his face closely. The initial confusion gave way to curiosity as he read about Frank congratulating us. Then, as he reached the core passage, the one about the life-changing mistake, his eyes widened slightly. He paused, reread the line, and then his entire body stiffened. His breathing became shallow and fast. He finished the letter and slowly put the brittle paper back on the desk. He looked at me, then back at the letter. "Dad," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. This is some kind of cruel joke, right? What does he mean? I'm his son." I leaned forward, putting my hands on the desk. It's not a joke, son. It's the truth. Your mother confirmed it. You are Frank's biological son. You were conceived right before Martha, and I got married. Frank died before he could tell me. The room was silent. David stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed on some point beyond me. He looked like a statue, frozen in time. The betrayal was too big, too foundational for him to process immediately. 40 years, David finally whispered, the two words heavy with disbelief. 40 years everyone has known this, and I was the only one in the dark? You and Mom? All this time? No. David, only your mother knew the truth. I corrected, feeling the need to protect myself, but realizing I couldn't. Frank died trying to tell me. Martha intercepted the letter, and she hid the truth to protect you, to protect our family. He stood up suddenly, pushing his chair back. He started pacing, running his hands through his dark hair exactly like Frank's. Protect me, he yelled, his voice cracking with pain. By letting me live a complete lie? My entire life, my identity, my bloodline, it's all a story I was told. All those family photos, all those jokes about looking like Uncle Frank. It wasn't a joke. It was the truth right in front of everyone's faces. I stood up and went to him, reaching out my hand. David, nothing about my love for you has changed. I am your father. Nothing Frank's blood can change that. David pulled away, shaking his head fiercely. It changes everything. Dad, I'm not David George. I'm David Frank. I don't even know who I am anymore. And Mom knew this every time she looked at me. He ran out of the study. I heard the front door slam, the sound echoing the shattering of our family's trust. I stood there, helpless, knowing I had just inflicted the greatest pain imaginable on my son. Martha came running down the hall from the bedroom. She looked at me, her face ravaged by fear. Did you tell him? Where is he? He knows, I said simply. And he just ran out. He's furious, Martha. He feels betrayed by both of us, especially you. Martha didn't hesitate. She ran the phone to call him, but I knew he wouldn't answer. He needed space. He needed to process 40 years of truth, catching up to 40 years of lies. David didn't come home that night. He called his wife Anna and told her he was checking into a hotel, saying he needed space. He couldn't face his family yet. The house was cold and quiet. Martha was a wreck, pacing between the study and the kitchen, trying David's phone over and over. He hates me, George, she kept repeating. He hates me for trying to protect him. He hates the secret, Martha. I corrected her gently. He doesn't hate you, but you kept the most important piece of his identity from him. That is a hard thing to forgive. I looked at the consequences of the children's harmless prank. The innocent search for treasure had unearthed the truth that was destroying the lives of 3 adults. The children had gone to bed happy, unaware that the simple metal box they found had just blown up their family's foundation. The irony was almost unbearable. The next day, David called me, not Martha. He asked me to meet him at a small cafe downtown. When I arrived, he looked tired, his eyes red. He didn't look like Frank anymore. He just looked like my son, heartbroken. I called my wife. David said quietly, stirring his coffee. I told her everything. She was shocked, but she understood that I needed her. She still loves me. And your mother? I asked carefully. I need to talk to her, he said. But not yet. Dad, why didn't you ever say anything? Didn't you see the resemblance? I look exactly like Uncle Frank. I was blind, David. I admit it. Love made me blind. When you were born, you were mine. That was all that mattered. I didn't want to see anything else. Your mother's secret worked because I desperately wanted it to be true. David took a deep breath. I don't know who I am. Dad, are my memories real? Was everything a performance? Your memories are real, David. I insisted firmly. Every fishing trip, every Christmas, every hug, that was all real. Your identity isn't defined by who gave you the blood. It's defined by who raised you. And I raised you. I chose you every single day for 40 years. That is more real than any biological connection. David nodded slowly, tears welling up again. Thank you, Dad. I needed to hear that. He then asked about Frank. He wanted to know about his biological father. I spent the next hour telling him every good memory I had of my brother. His kindness, his brilliance, his terrible sense of humor. David listened intently, piecing together the fragmented identity of the man who had loved his mother and had been cheated out of knowing his son. David agreed to come home that evening to talk to Martha. He said he couldn't hate her completely, but he needed her to explain the betrayal to him, not just to me. When David arrived home, Martha was waiting in the living room. The grandchildren were safely at a neighbor's house. The confrontation was quiet, devastating, and necessary. David walked up to Martha, his face hard, and just stared at her. "Why, Mom? Why 40 years of silence?" Martha simply repeated her truth. "I loved you too much to let the truth hurt you. I loved George too much to let the truth break his heart. I made a selfish decision out of overwhelming love." David didn't yell. He just started crying, and Martha went to him, wrapping her arms around her son. "Frank's son, my son. I don't know if I can forgive the lie, Mom," David choked out. "But I need my mother." The healing process was slow and painful. David needed distance from Martha, but he needed me more than ever. Our bond, once based on biology, was now forged in a deeper commitment of choice and honesty. I was his father because I chose to be, and I chose him again right there in the aftermath of the truth. Martha and I were fractured. Our marriage survived, but the perfect trust was gone. She had hidden a darkness that had almost destroyed us. We would have to rebuild our relationship based on a new, sober understanding of each other's capacity for secrets. We decided to keep the full truth about Frank's letter and the specific details of the confrontation hidden from the grandchildren. Their innocent hands had uncovered enough darkness for one generation. They only knew that Grandpa George was helping his son David deal with a difficult family history. A week later, Leo and Lily asked me about the green metal box again. They wanted to know if I had found any more treasure. I smiled, sitting them down on the sofa. "The only treasure I found was the truth, kids," I said. "And the truth is sometimes heavy, but it's always better than a secret." I had lost my biological son, but I had gained a deeper, stronger relationship with the man I called my son. I had lost decades of blind trust in my wife, but I had gained a frightening clarity about the fragility of family history. The most innocent hands had indeed uncovered the darkest secret. And while the truth hurt, it finally set us free to build a future based on honesty, however messy that truth might be.